What it do, Fostering the People crew. I'm your host, Alana Collins, and this is Fostering the People podcast. And guess what? We back for season 2, baby. Okay. Yes, it has been a very quick 8 weeks to say the least. But throughout these 8 weeks, I have relaxed, taken time off. I have enjoyed my summer in the DMV. And I have been working to really just plan out season 2 of Fostering the People podcast so that you guys can benefit from it. And I'm so happy to finally share just what I have been working on. So for season 1 of Fostering the People, we focused on really how to build the foundation to foster growth in yourself. And that is really the core mission of Fostering the People podcast. But for season 2, I really wanted to just take a focused lens on that particular topic, but as it relates to the foster care system, because as some of you may know, I am a former foster youth from the state of Missouri, but I now live in Alexandria, Virginia. And at the age of 12, I was taken into foster care along with my twin sister. And we did not age out until we were 21 years old. And when I aged out, I really thought that I had everything figured out. But there were 3 things that I struggled with after aging out of the foster care system. And the biggest thing was not knowing what resources I had available to me and when I could actually start using them. The second thing is communication. Like, I struggled immensely with communication, in part because I really didn't think I could trust people. And the third thing I struggled with is really just how to figure out what I wanted to do. So I don't know how most people decide what they want to study in college, but I chose to get my degree in political science because honestly, the people who had the most impact in my life were politicians or worked in politics in some way, shape, or form. And I just thought that was what I had to do in order to be like them. And although I'm grateful that I do have my political science degree because everything is politics, I wish that I had better mentorship to really identify my strengths and weaknesses as I navigated such a difficult time in my life. And so luckily, I was able to graduate with my political science degree. After getting my degree, I then worked in the nonprofit sector. I initially started working with at-risk youth who were experiencing a lot of instability. And my goal was to really help them become successfully independent. And I realized very early on that although I am very passionate and I really enjoy working with youth, I couldn't sustain working in that particular environment long term if I wanted to also take care of myself in the long run. And so I thought, okay, let me transition a little bit. I like working with people. I like solving problems. Well, that's exactly how I got my master's in business administration because it allowed me to continue working with people and solve problems, but not problems that involve real human beings so directly. Hopefully you understand what I mean. So I got my MBA, and through getting my MBA, I realized just how much I actually like learning and how little support I actually received as an undergrad that I could have received had I just communicated more and had been more open with seeking out resources and guidance from people I didn't know. And so after getting my MBA, I transitioned out of the nonprofit sector, and now I just work in corporate America. And so I no longer do social services, but working with foster youth and just at-risk youth in general is still something that is very near and dear to my heart. And so that is why I started Fostering the People podcast, because although I no longer work in that space, I know that I can still be a voice and offer support to youth who are currently in that space and people who work with them or may come across them. And so that's really why I chose to start the podcast, Fostering the People. And that's also why I have the name Fostering the People, because although I myself am a former foster youth, I worked with at-risk youth, and everyone experienced trauma, and everyone has to acknowledge the trauma that they've experienced, but also figure out what happens after that trauma. And I think that, especially foster youth, it's very easy to be stuck in what happened and what should have went better than what it did and everything. I myself struggled with that immensely, even right after aging out of the foster care system. And through mentorship, through just honest conversations, I was able to navigate a path out of that. And so that's the intention behind Fostering the People. It's not just for foster youth. It's really for anyone who has experienced trauma and is learning to be a better version of themselves in spite of it. There are a few changes I made for season 2 of Fostering the People podcast. The biggest changes is we got a website, y'all. We have a website, okay? That is one of the things that I have been working on for the past 8 weeks, is developing a website so that it can act as a repository for the information that I share. Next, I will be highlighting different policies and legislation as it relates to the foster care system. Now, this may be good or bad, but overall, it's really just to provide awareness and information so that we can stay aware of what's happening in our community. So we'll be exploring resources, discussing legislation and policies as it relates to the foster care system, breaking down myths, and identifying current barriers that youth in the system and out of the system still face, and just celebrating wins, because all of those things are important, especially if we are trying to focus on who we want to be instead of what our environment expected us to be. So we'll be having conversations with professionals, former foster youth, researchers, and advocates, because I myself aged out of foster care 8 years ago. And so the system is constantly evolving. And unfortunately, every state has their own policies as it relates to the foster care system. And so Tennessee can be very different from someone who grew up in St. Louis. And so because of that, I really just wanted to make sure that I'm providing listeners with updated knowledge as it relates to the foster care system. So let's transition and talk about something that's happening right now that could have a significant impact on thousands of current and former foster youth in the system. So there is currently a bipartisan bill in the United States Senate titled Foster Youth Education and Workforce Opportunity Act of 2026. And this bill hasn't become law yet, but there are a few things in the bill that would really change the way foster youth received funding to further their education. Just so you know, we're not diving too deep into this today because we're going to actually talk about it in the next 2 episodes. So don't fret. You got to come back for episode 2 and 3 if you want to get more information. But I really just want to kind of give you a general summary of it so that you guys can be aware. So this bill will update language to the Educational Training Voucher, which is a voucher that foster youth, current and former foster youth, can receive once they meet certain requirements if they are in school. This bill specifically caught my attention because it recognized something that a lot of foster youth already know. There is more than one path to building a successful life. I myself went from foster care to college to grad school. But college is not the only path to success. So this bill would not only increase the total award amount for ETV funding, but it would also expand beyond traditional college pathways. There will also be revisions to the overall application process to make it easier for youth to submit their applications. And lastly, it will improve outreach so eligible people can know about this resource. And this is really important because I didn't start getting ETV funding until the end of my second semester of sophomore year. And a little bit about me, I actually took classes in the summertime and in the winter months because I recognized that it would be very hard for me to actively be working and trying to survive while no longer being in foster care. And so I wanted to kind of take the pressure off myself as much as possible to ensure that I actually did graduate. And so had I known about this ETV funding sooner, it would have allowed me to actually take these classes without taking out more student loan debt. And so I think this is really important because it would not only allow for you to just focus on addressing other issues that they may have so that they can ensure that they're more successfully independent, but it would allow for states to be able to exercise all of their ETV funding. And if you want the full breakdown on this particular bill and other legislation as it relates to the foster care system, I will actually be posting a blog on a monthly basis to just share more knowledge and information as it relates to the bills and legislation that we talk about on the podcast. And so stay tuned for that. It'll be released at the end of August. It'll be released at the end of each month because it will focus on the topics we discuss in the episodes through that month. Policy is one piece of the puzzle, but the other piece is the misinformation as it relates to the foster care system. So one of the biggest things that people assume about the foster care system, at least the people that ask me questions about the foster care system, is that foster youth just get everything for free. And that can be education, housing, other resources. It's all for free. I can tell you right now, I did not go to college for free, not even by a long shot, okay? And I know that there are resources in states that allow for youth to go to college for free. But like I said earlier, each state has their own foster care policies. And so each state can choose whether or not they allocate resources. That, unfortunately, is not what Missouri said to me. Missouri was just like, you better go out there and fight like hell with the rest of them. And I said, okay, with my pitchfork. Yes, there are resources that are available for foster youth. We talked about one of them, which is the Education and Training Voucher. We also talked about how you have to actually seek out that resource because if you don't, no one else will tell you that you actually qualify for it. And so there's ETV funding. You could also receive assistance with housing and just helping with getting a job. But all of these things, just like any other resource that's available to the community, is something that youth have to actively search for and then exercise. And if they live in rural parts of the country, those resources are less and less available to them. God forbid they don't have a car. God forbid they don't have public transportation to use. It's virtually impossible for them to actually use those resources available to them. And that is why so many youth struggle with homelessness and financial insecurity and lack of education because the resources are out there, but learning how to identify them and then actively exercising your right to them are two very different things. And so that is the myth for this episode because we are not just fostering growth, we are fostering facts and information. And that brings me to the real reason for this season. You know, that rhymed a little bit. Anyway, when people think about foster care, they think about children, but those children become adults and they either go to college or they don't. And they get jobs and they try to figure out a sense of normalcy after experiencing trauma in their childhood. And through just trial and error, they become who they are today. They start careers, they join the military, they become parents, they start businesses, they work in government, they lead nonprofits, they buy homes, they heal, they struggle, they start over, and they keep going. And I don't think that that particular thing is talked about enough. So this season is really to answer the question of what happens next? What happens after foster care? Because this podcast isn't just for the people who experienced foster care. They are for educators, case managers, policymakers, employers, friends, and families. And anyone who really just wants to understand the foster care system and how to support someone who is figuring out life after foster care. Overall, each conversation will answer a different version of the same question, which is, what happens next? I really hope you join me this season, because this isn't just about foster care. It's about writing the rest of your story. Because I really just want listeners, and specifically foster youth, to remember that foster care is a chapter. It is not the whole book. And you can either let your experiences define you in a negative way, or you can use it as fuel to still be the person that you want to be. And you may not know who you want to be, because I didn't know when I was in undergrad what I even wanted to study. And there's a lot of things that you'll experience after the foster care system that will distract you from actually realizing that you have a choice now, and it can be whatever decision you want to make. And so I'm just here to remind you about that. So thank you so much for joining me for episode 1 of Fostering the People podcast. Again, my name is Alana Collins. And if you are new, definitely make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. We are on all podcast platforms. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And don't forget, we have a whole website, fosteringthepeoplepodcast.com, where we will continue to keep a repository of information. Until next time, guys. Barriers that master students face. What is the biggest barrier, and did you yourself experience that while you were getting your doctorate degree?
Yeah, so the two biggest barriers were finances. Trying to finance your MSW program, and where they may have had a voucher in undergrad, once you completed that or once you turn a certain age,